The special phone, a direct encrypted line, rang in the pre-dawn hours in Washington. The Oval Office was nearly dark, lit only by the dim glow of a gold lamp. The ring was not ordinary. It could not be ignored. Only 2 or 3 men in the world had access to that channel. When Trump answered, the Russian president's deep, measured voice rolled through the room like distant thunder. "Mr. President, we have a matter of mutual interest." Trump stayed silent for a few seconds, merely breathing, as if weighing the words before they were even spoken. The Russian went on, each sentence delivered with the cold calculation of someone playing chess with human lives. "The man in Caracas, Maduro. He's weakened. His protective circle is no longer what it was. We have monitored routes, bought generals, and infiltrated agents. If we join forces, he will fall in days. Imagine the impact. Together we could sweep this tyrant off the map." Trump leaned back in his leather chair, his gaze fixed on nothing. His advisors, sitting quietly to the side of the room, watched every nuance. The air was heavy, almost suffocating. He knew that offer was not merely cooperation. It came poisoned. Russia did not just want to topple Maduro. It wanted to plant its flag amid the ruins. "Do you think I need you?" Trump answered at last, his voice low and laced with disdain. On the other end of the line, the Russian did not flinch. He only adjusted his tone, letting slip an almost imperceptible irony. "No one is strong enough to dominate the board alone, Mr. President. The world is built on alliances. Refusing help can be a dangerous luxury." Those words fell like knives in the room. The advisors shifted, uneasy. One, bolder than the rest, risked a whisper into Trump's ear. "Sir, if we accept, we gain immediate field intelligence. Maduro's fall would be instant." Trump raised his hand, silencing him. His eyes burned with a quiet fury. He bent forward over the table and spoke into the phone like a man issuing a sentence. "Listen carefully. I don't need anyone. If I wanted, Maduro would have been gone long ago. What's stopping me isn't a lack of force, it's strategy. America doesn't ask for favors. America decides when and how an enemy falls." Silence on the other end lasted longer than expected. You could hear even the cold breath being drawn. The Russian finally returned in a frigid tone. "Pride is a dangerous weapon. The world turns, Mr. President, and one day even the strongest must extend a hand." Trump would not yield. His voice rang like tempered steel. "Don't confuse pride with power. You want Maduro because you want Venezuela. I don't bargain with masked interests. When Maduro falls, and he will fall, it will be by the United States will alone, and by no one else's." The room seemed to quake. The advisors avoided even breathing loudly. The tension wasn't just in the refusal, but in the clash of egos unfolding, a duel bigger than Caracas, bigger than the Americas. That conversation was the harbinger of a global contest. The Russian then let out one last line, heavy with veiled threat. "Very well, Trump. But remember, he who refuses an outstretched hand may later find a closed fist. History does not forgive men who think themselves gods." The phone went dead. Trump remained motionless, staring into nothing. His advisors waited for some reaction, any gesture. Finally he rose slowly, straightened his jacket, and spoke with the calm of a man who believes he carries destiny on his shoulders. "Maduro is a small problem. The real game is showing the world that only one man decides who falls and who stays. And that man is me." A deadly silence filled the room. The advisors understood. There would be no alliances, no sharing. There would be only Trump against everyone. And in that moment there seemed to be no doubt. He truly believed he would win. The pre-dawn hours dissolved into a tense silence through the corridors of the White House. After the call, Trump did not return to rest. He paced in circles across the Oval Office, hands clasped behind his back, his brow furrowed. His advisors, gathered around the large table, waited for a word, but the president seemed more focused on a war being fought inside himself than on the opinions around him. Finally, he broke the silence with an outburst. "They think they can offer me help like I'm a beggar asking for alms. They don't understand. America doesn't need Moscow, nor Beijing, nor Caracas. We're the ones who set the rules. One of his closest aides, John McAllister, cleared his throat before speaking. Sir, no one here questions your leadership. But rejecting Russia like that, publicly or not, it creates fractures. They will not forget. Trump spun suddenly, pointing a finger at him, his voice edged with anger and conviction. And who said I want them to forget? I want them to remember every day. I want them to wake up and know, Trump refused Russia. Trump needs no one. That is power, John. That is leadership. The tension rose. Another advisor, more pragmatic, tried to intervene. Mr. President, with all due respect, we've been dealing with Maduro for years. He survived coups, sanctions, isolation. The Russians have information that could shorten the process. Imagine the global impact if Maduro falls in weeks instead of years. Trump cut him off with a brusque gesture, as if slicing the air with a knife. I don't want it in weeks. I want it when I choose. When it's most convenient for me, not for them. If I accept help, the credit will be shared. And Trump does not share credit. Glances crossed among the advisors. Some saw courage, others saw recklessness. But no one dared confront him directly. Trump walked to the window, watching the lawn bathed in moonlight. Maduro is a cornered dog. He barks but doesn't bite. I can crush him whenever I want. The question isn't capability, it's demonstration. Do you think I'm fighting only Maduro? No. I'm showing the world there's no alliance that can bend me. America is an empire. And empires don't ask for help. They command. McAllister tried one last time, his voice low, almost a whisper. But sir, what if Russia decides to act on its own? Trump turned slowly, a hard smile forming on his face. If they do, they'll find out what it means to wake a giant. I don't chase third-rate dictators because I'm afraid of them. I do it to show who's in charge. If Russia wants to play, it will end up crushed along with Maduro. The sentence echoed through the room like an oath. The room fell into absolute silence, only the distant ticking of a clock marking the seconds. Deep down, every advisor knew Trump had turned the refusal into a spectacle of national pride. It wasn't only about toppling Maduro. It was about proving that the United States stood above any alliance, above any secret deal. He sat back down, leaned back and said in a grave tone, as if dictating the rules of an invisible court, "Make a note of this. When Maduro falls, and he will fall, the world will remember one detail. It was Trump who did it. Alone. And there is no greater glory than that." The words hung in the air, heavy as lead. Pride had become destiny. And everyone in that room understood that from that moment on, there was no turning back. Trump had chosen the riskiest path, a solitary victory. In the heart of Moscow, the Kremlin was shrouded in darkness. Snow fell slowly, covering the rooftops like a funerary shroud. Inside a vast room, its dark wooden walls and armored windows, the Russian president stood motionless before a long table, his gaze fixed on an untouched crystal glass full of vodka. The silence there was sharper than any word. Generals and advisors waited tensely for the reaction to the American refusal. It was rare for someone to say no to Russia so explicitly, and even rarer in such a humiliating way. Finally, the Russian president broke the silence, his voice low, almost a whisper, but laden with threat. "He thinks he can mock us." One of the generals, a broad-shouldered man whose face bore the scars of war, leaned forward. "Sir, if we want, Maduro can be removed in a matter of days. Our men are ready, our route secure. We don't need American approval." The Russian leader slowly raised his eyes, penetrating like a blade. "And that is exactly what Trump wants us to do. He wants us to rush. He wants to force us to show our cards. But we don't play to satisfy egos. We play to dominate the board." Another advisor, younger and ambitious, interjected. "With all due respect, sir, allowing the Americans to take down Maduro alone is risky. It will further cement Trump's image as an unbeatable leader. He already acts like an emperor." The Russian president tapped his fingers lightly on the table, the sound echoing like a judge's gavel. Trump believes himself invincible because he hasn't yet felt the weight of a real opposition. He thinks he can isolate Russia with a simple gesture of arrogance. But each refusal, each humiliation, builds in us something he cannot control: patience. And patience is the deadliest weapon. The generals exchanged looks. It was clear. The leader did not want haste. He planned to turn the refusal into an opportunity. Meanwhile, in Caracas, Maduro was informed by his aides about rumors of the call. His face, tired and swollen, showed apprehension. So the gringo didn't accept Russian help? He asked in a hoarse voice. It seems not, Mr. President. They say he claimed he needs no one. Maduro gave a nervous laugh that echoed through the room. That man is crazy. Crazy enough to try to come after me alone. But if he refuses help, he isolates himself. And an isolated enemy always finds resistance. Despite the words, his expression betrayed the opposite. Fear of being targeted by a power that never forgets. Back in the Kremlin, the Russian president rose, walked to the window, and watched the snow cover the streets. He spoke without turning his face. Prepare our networks in Latin America. If Trump wants to play alone, let him play. But when he moves his piece against Maduro, we will be there in the shadows, ready to turn the board against him. It won't be a war against Caracas. It will be a war against the American ego itself. Silence returned to dominate the room. A frigid silence of predators waiting for the right moment to strike. And so, while Trump reveled in Washington over his decision, a countergame was born in Moscow. The refusal had not only offended, it had awakened a burning desire for revenge. Maduro's fate was becoming only a detail. The real prize was something else: to humiliate Trump before the world. The glow of the screens rose like an artificial dawn in the secret command center set up beneath the White House. Maps, satellite photos, lines traced in red. It looked like a war board, and every piece had a name, a face, a risk. Trump entered without knocking, large and unmoving, as if born already with the battle orders etched into his voice. His men stood quietly. "Let's get straight to the point," he said without preamble. "No alliances. No intermediaries. If anyone wants to clap, let them clap. I want results." The room filled with restrained voices. Middle-aged generals, heads of intelligence, and political advisors sat in chairs, each with a folder. Each folder containing secrets no one was supposed to read. The planning that followed wasn't mere vanity. It was an experiment in power, to prove that one man could redraw borders. John McAllister opened the briefing. Influence operations, neutralization of key guards, infiltration from within the security forces. He showed maritime and air routes, probable shelter locations, the geography of bot loyalties. Each slide was a step toward something that could explode into an international scandal. "We need surgical precision," the general beside him said, "and no noise. If we leak, the political cost will be immense. Not only for us, but for regional stability." Trump smiled, a short, dry smile. Stability is a relative term. For the strong, stability is the obedience of others. I want a plan in which no one can say they helped us. I want a victory that looks like ours and ours alone. There was a murmur. A civilian advisor spoke cautiously. "Sir, operating alone means running against forces that certainly won't remain idle. Russia is already moving its pieces. We know of activity in ports and influence networks. They may try to interpose obstacles, from disinformation operations to direct logistical support for Maduro." Trump slammed his hand on the table as if striking a word from the air. "Let them come. I want them to come. If there's a confrontation, it will be the test. And tests require risk." While these words were spoken, another game ran in parallel. Silent as vipers among mountain ranges, American agents were mobilized with orders to advance along unofficial paths. Consultants who worked like businessmen, shell companies rented to supply equipment, cyber teams to cut communications at the right moment. This was not a plan of bravado. It was power engineering. Trump personally chose a small group he trusted without question. There was a sense of ceremony. Each name called seemed to seal an oath. It was his private guard of mortal decisions. "You don't fail me," he said, and the men nodded with measured steps. "If you fail, there will be no retreat. History is mine to write." Across the continent, Russian and Cuban agents were already moving through ports, discreet bases, and security contracts. They did not announce themselves. They planted shadows. Small containers of equipment appeared on docks. Ex-military men were recruited under the cover of consultancy. Bank accounts warmed with transfers sent by nebula senders. In Caracas, the feeling was of a house surrounded. Maduro slept with a vigil of loyalists. His advisors, however, felt that soldiers alone weren't enough. Narratives were necessary. They bought newspapers, fed influencers, created conspiracy stories that painted the Americans as imperialist invaders and Russia as the guardian of sovereignty. Trump, far away, saw that as theater. To him, theater only mattered if it could be replaced by steel and silence. He ordered the psychological operations to be ramped up. Campaigns to demoralize within Maduro's forces, offers of amnesty for deserters, private messages to officers who might want to jump ship. The intent was clear: to unravel the fabric of loyalty before cutting the threads. But there was a fine line between strategy and arrogance. In a late-night meeting, someone dared to put the costs on the table. Not only financial, but reputational and human. "If something goes wrong, sir, the consequences are global. We could come into direct conflict with interests that won't back down. An unplanned escalation could consume alliances, markets, and lives." Trump stared at the man, and for a moment the gleam in his eyes showed what many called the shine of a leader. Others called it blind risk. "If history is written by cowards, it will be a book of excuses. I prefer to write with a pen of force." The decision was made. The plan approved. Agents departed on night flights. Encrypted messages crossed oceans. Funds circulated through obscure circuits. The clock ticked toward the moment of test. And on the global board, while Russian spies adjusted pieces in the shadows and allies debated in whispers, Trump prepared the move that promised to transform him from strategist to ruthless lord of fate. However, at that very moment, in a cold room thousands of miles away, the Russian president reviewed reports from his own networks. He smiled without joy. To him, the American refusal had been a lit match. Not vengeance at once, he thought, something deeper. He would dismantle Trump's aura of invincibility from within. The board was set. The pieces moved. And the world waited, unaware that what was coming would not be merely the fall of a man in Caracas, but a collision of vanities that could, before everyone's eyes, tear down the curtains of power. "Let the game begin," Trump said, as if giving the order to an invisible battalion. And so, with pride inflated and the tension in the air like a wire about to snap, each side waited for the first sound of the great battle approaching. The sky over Washington burned orange and red as Trump finally sat at the Oval table. The city lights shimmered in the distance, but inside, at the heart of the White House, the air felt heavy, almost tangible. It wasn't just the tension of an imminent international operation. It was the weight of decades of power, ego, and personal history. Every decision made up to that moment converged on a single truth: Trump needed no one. "Listen to me carefully," he said, his voice low, firm, and cutting. "The world does not set my rules. I will set theirs." His advisors, exhausted and cautious, remained silent, as if every word were gunpowder. They already knew the pattern. Trump acted alone, decided alone, and expected the world to bow before it. But this time, the stakes were higher. Maduro was about to feel the weight of personal determination, of a leader who refuses to share glory or power. Meanwhile, in the shadows of Latin America, Russian agents monitored every move. Small containers shifted between ports, communications were intercepted, and deserters were seduced by silent promises. Moscow did not retreat. It observed. Every step Trump took was an invitation to tension, every unilateral decision a provocation. But Trump seemed impervious. In the Oval Office, he traced the final moves of the plan: psychological operations, covert infiltrations, pressure on regional allies, and a silent siege that would crush any resistance before it even realized it existed. Every step was designed to create the impression that American power commanded alone. Maduro will realize too late that there are no allies, only America and my decision. "That is how power works," Trump muttered, almost to himself. In Caracas, Maduro began to feel the invisible siege. Deserters in his forces, communications blocked, uneasy allies. The fear was no longer just of an external force. It was the precision and certainty of an enemy who does not back down, does not negotiate, and needs no one. As the days passed, global tension reached its peak. Diplomatic cables from international allies, veiled warnings, military and diplomatic movements, everything seemed to revolve around one question: who would control Maduro's fate? But Trump had a clear answer: himself. At the Kremlin, the Russian president studied reports, calculating every possible reaction. American arrogance had been challenged, and it excited and irritated him simultaneously. Every move Trump made was a silent provocation. Every unilateral decision, a test of geopolitical endurance. Yet Trump remained steadfast. At the White House, Trump convened his inner circle. There were no maps on the table, no visible papers, only men and women who knew they were witnessing a historic decision. He spoke with absolute calm, yet with the weight of an emperor. When Maduro falls, there will be no shared credit, no diplomacy to soften the truth. Only America. Only my decision. And it must be so. Whoever dares interfere will learn that a leader who asks for no help is invincible. The atmosphere in the room was almost religious. Everyone felt the tension, the power, the danger. Every second seemed like an eternity. Every breath carried the metallic scent of imminent war, not just against Maduro, but against any power that dared challenge American resolve. Then, in absolute silence, Trump stood. He walked to the window, looking out over the city pulsing in the distance. There was no fear in his eyes, only the certainty of a man who knew he stood alone, but complete, relentless, and absolute. I need no allies. I need no favors. I am America, and anyone against me will learn that the hardest way possible. The phones, the screens, the maps, the spies, all were secondary to his conviction. The world, in all its complexity, could not stop a man who had decided his power required no external validation. As the night shadows spread over Washington, Caracas, Moscow, and beyond, a single truth hung in the air. Trump had risen alone, and no one could stop him. Maduro was only the beginning. The game had begun, and the entire world now watched on the edge of a knife, the triumph of a man who needed no one, and who would make sure everyone knew it.